I'm going to show you through how I do a basic DJ master chain, ready for clubs, ready for self-release, ready for DJ promo. So please like the video if you enjoy it. Please comment if you have any questions or different ways to make a DJ master chain. And share this with a friend who's never mastered their tracks before and needs to watch this video. Hope you enjoy.
Boom! Yes, you lot. Today's video is going to be about doing a DJ master. So I will warn you lot, I'm not a mastering engineer. And I would recommend you go and get your tracks mastered by someone else for release. Why? I'll tell you why. Because when you get it done by a mastering engineer, they have absolutely no emotional attachment to the song. Why is that important? Imagine you've been working on a song for like 2 weeks and it's come down to mastering, yeah. You're not going to be making very informed decisions because you're just thinking, oh, I want to get this out of the way, I want to get it done. And you've listened to the track so many times that you're sort of bored of it and you're not going to be making adjustments on an objective basis because there's a specific way in your head that it was supposed to sound like when it was mastered, etc., etc. Whereas, and this kind of applies for mixing as well, but mixing is a little bit more subjective. When you send it to a mastering engineer, that is like one of 10 things they'll work on in the week. So they are purely going to look at how can I make this the loudest possible it can be for the genre. And that's the important thing, is when mastering, you want to get it to sound as loud as possible for the genre. And I personally just think it's a bit harder to do that when you've already spent so much time and effort doing the song. So yeah, but that's not why you're here today. I hope you've not clicked off yet. So, doing a DJ master. Why should we do a DJ master? We should do one purely to sort of get our track there ready. As you can see, I've already got all these tracks here. These are tracks I've been working on recently. I do like to master tracks within a similar... So, yeah, as you can see, all the plugins are on the side there. So the reason why I do master everything all in the same project is because I do like to make tracks that sound similar and have similar characteristics, have a sort of similar, I like to call sonic flavor. If you don't know what that means, I basically just mean how it sounds when it's mastered and like the actual audio element of it. I just want them all to be quite coherent. Quite a lot of professional mix engineers for different genres will sort of mix and master side by side. So like they'll do one, then they'll do another, then they'll do another in the same session to sort of get the same essence of their mix downs in. And the same thing applies to mastering. The only thing is mastering's a little bit more objective. You want it to just be loud, hit certain values like -8 LUFS, etc., etc. So let's crack on with the actual video. What would I start doing when doing a DJ? So let's crack on then. So we've got original sound here. That's what I was working on yesterday, and you can see here what I've done. So I've done an EQ, a saturator, a vintage EQ, a multiband compressor, a regular compressor, an EQ, and then the final limiter. Now, we might not follow this exact chain, but this is along the lines of what we want to do. As we can see here on this Crowd 8 moving one, go stream that. We've got basically what this is based off. So it's all it's missing is just that EQ there. I've done a vintage EQ instead, but I'll talk you through step by step each one that I'm doing, and it'll all make sense. So let's get rid of that for now, because we'll compare it at the end and we'll flick back and forth at the end. So for now, let's get this on a fresh channel, channel 4. And let's start with a bit of EQ. So this EQ will be a subtractive EQ. We're purely looking to take away from the sound with this EQ and try and sweep for frequencies which are just overpowering the mix.
Alright.
So yeah, let's find a section of the song that we can just loop over and over again.
Like that. 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 Like that.
Ideally a bit of the song that just has all the core elements in. But if not, I'd probably recommend just flicking through section by section and just testing that your changes hold up for each section. So let's start off.
Like that.
Cool. I think the mix down for this went quite well, to be honest. So there wasn't really a whole lot that I found. So what I was doing there, I think I should have already done a video on this, but kind of sweeping for frequencies and listening to when it sounds harsh. Because when you're raising that, obviously everything's going to sound really loud, but it's the bits that sound like really, really loud and just don't really add any value to the mix. That's what you want to take down. And I found that this region, there's a lot of build up there. Obviously, around 200 hertz, you know, a lot of the channels are getting cool. So now that we've done the EQ, I will probably move on to the saturation section. So I would use FabFilter Saturn. If you don't have Saturn, any plugin where you can sort of make sure that everything below 120 is being cut off and that is not being applied to the saturator is really important, because we don't want to mess with those sub frequencies and those sine waves going up and down below 120. We just want to leave them as it is. So I've turned it off, turn everything down, turn it off. Here, I probably won't let this go above 20 because really this saturator doesn't want to do that much, because if you listen,
Like that. Alright. Like that.
it will completely change the way your track sounds. So what I would do instead is turn this up to about 50.
Like that. Alright. Like that.
And find one that you like that adds something to your track, and then bring that down to between 10 and 20, maybe 25 if you want that effect. But this stage, you don't want to be doing changes to your mix down that are so drastic, because by this stage, if you need to be doing that, you need to go sort it out in the mix. So I like the warm tube. I thought it added a nice bit of just like power to everything above 120. So
Like that. Alright.
brilliant. We've brought up the perceived loudness of the track, and that's not even gone up in the slightest. Cool. So now let's listen again. Cool. So now we've done the saturation. What's next? The pull tech. So I'll do two examples of this. I'll do it with the vintage EQ first, so that you lot can kind of understand what's going down. So I'm using Rare SE here. This is a really cool plugin. I believe it's free. It's a replica of the pull tech. I'm going to do the pull tech trick. So if you don't know what that is essentially where you boost your vintage EQ by a certain amount to a certain frequency. I would recommend either 60, 30 or 100. But I tend to flick between 60 and 30 just because the subs around that region are really nice and warm. And 100 is more like the thump of the kick. But your track might need that. But we're going to boost this a lot and see what we like.
Like that. Alright. Like that. Like that.
Yeah, so 100 was quite boxy, so I'm going to go...
Like that. Alright. Like that.
Cool, so that is the pull tech trick. It's where you boost your pull tech EQ by a certain amount and then attenuate it by the exact same amount. And what you're going to do is you're going to shape it to the curve of the vintage EQ without actually boosting the signal in terms of volume.
Like that. Alright. Like that. Like that. Alright.
I was flicking on and off to try and listen to the difference, and the difference is we've got a much more powerful low end without actually bringing up the volume at all, but we have lost a bit of the highs. So what would I do there? I would do the same thing, try and find what frequency is actually doing something for the top end.
Like that. Alright. Like that. Like that. Alright.
So, if I'm going to be honest, I don't really think this track needs the rare SE, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to get in original sound pre-master and show you all what that sounds like with it on and off. So this is with the UAD pull tech. Let me turn this. Yeah, for some reason you lot can't really see that, but the parameters before where it was like boost, attenuate, I've boosted this by so 30 hertz, and I've boosted it by 2, reduced by 2, and then at 8K I've boosted by 2, reduced by 2. And what that has done is it's given it a bit more power in those regions without actually bringing the volume up. Because we're boosting and attenuating, what's really happening with the vintage EQ is that the curve of the EQ is really shaping the sound, as opposed to just straight up boosting like you would a parametric EQ, and then just bringing it up. It's kind of shaping it more than it is boosting it when you do the boost and attenuate. But if you do want it to boost and actually bring it up but still have that curve, I would just have your boost higher than your attenuate, and vice versa. If you want that sort of curve but you want it like lower, like quieter in volume, but if that was the case, I would just use a parametric EQ and really get in there and find which EQ band you want. But yeah, vintage EQ, it isn't always needed, and I think in this track, to be honest, it's not needed. I think wrong fucking track. I like it, if anything. I don't think the top and bottom end need it, actually. Now that I'm listening to it again, I think maybe the mids need it. You guys can't even really see that. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the peak to around 2K. Cool, so at about 1K and 3K, I've boosted it with the Pultec mid EQ. So, again, same things apply in terms of the curve. If you're not too familiar with what I mean by the curve, it's basically the smiley face curve. I'm not too clued up on it, but what I'm pretty sure it is that the smiley face curve that these vintage EQs have is quite musically pleasing to the ear, because it's not just like an EQ where it just boosts in a certain region and then just leaves it. It boosts in the region, and then just before it will also dip. So that's kind of more emphasizing what you're boosting, and that is more pleasing to the human ear because it sounds more natural. So that is kind of the aim with these vintage EQs. So yeah, if anything, that's a bit of a deep dive on vintage EQs and the reason to use them. But moving on, I will say the next thing to do is the compression section of the master. So we've kind of done the enhancements and the reductions of our track, and there's nothing really left.
Like that. Alright. Like that.
Yeah, so our track kind of keeps that same sort of balance, but now it's just poking out in the mids a bit. And that's kind of what you want. You don't want to lose that tonal balance that the mix down already has, because if that's the case, then you're not really mastering, you are a little bit more mixing. But again, I'm not a mastering engineer. I can't comment on that truly. But from what I've found in my experience, you don't want to change that tonal balance too much. So that's why even these boosts, they're only like 1 decibel, 2 decibels at the most. But let's get a Pro MB up. You can either use a Pro MB or you can use a Maximus for this, but essentially what you want to do is 120 hertz till about 400 hertz here. No, we'll do 500 for this track. 500 till about 4K and 4K and above. We're splitting it into 4 bands: the lows, low mids, highs. Why are we doing this? Well, we kind of want to make sure that all the volumes in these sections, the 4 main sections in my opinion, you want to make sure that the volume is quite consistent now. So we're setting up the threshold of the compressor and we're saying, right, we don't really want you to go over this limit. Why are we not just doing it all around? We are going to be doing it all around, but different sections need different amounts of compression, different ratios, different attack, different releases. Some might need boosting, some might not. And more importantly, if you were to put one big compressor on there, the compressor is only going to react to the loudest signal, which is always going to be the low end. So we don't want to do that for this case, because we want to make sure each band is sort of staying under the threshold, which we are going to set. And the reason for the threshold is so that we have a consistent sound, which is kind of the reason for this compression. So let's start off with the lows.
Like that. Alright.
And then set all these thresholds back
Like that.
so that we're not influencing our mixing decisions. So let's start with the low band. I'm going to have a ratio of 3:1. Bit of a softer knee. Just a little bit. And I would keep the attack and release about the same, maybe a little bit less.
Like that. Alright. Like that. Like that. Alright.
Don't really want anything more than 3 on there. I do it to about 1 to 2, but if it's needed, 3, but I wouldn't really go over that.
Like that. Alright. Like that. Like that.
Cool. So now it's going, when the compressor's engaging, it's going back to that line, and that's what we want. Because we don't want to lose any volume by doing this. We just want to make sure that each band has quite a consistent volume. So when it's the lows and the highs, I would always do the 3:1, 2.5, maybe 4:1, depending on what you need, because you want these sections to be really thick and consistent in volume, because that is what's going to hit in the club. And you don't want too many dynamic. Maybe in the highs you'll want a few more dynamics, but you see the subsection, you don't want it to really be dynamic. You want it to be powerful. You want it to cut through. So that's why we're having the 3:1 ratio. We're going for about 2 decibels gain reduction there. These highs, I would probably do about 2.7, maybe 3. I'm going to do about 2.7. And a bit of a higher attack, because you do want some of those transients to cut through. A bit of a shorter release, so you want it to be a bit snappier.
Like that. Alright. Like that.
Again, don't want to go too drastic.
Like that, like that. Alright.
Cool. Again, remember these very subtle changes we're making. The lower mid section, you do want this to be quite compressed, but not too compressed. This is where quite a lot of like the character of your track is going to be, along with the high mids as well. But for these more techie tracks, especially like the one that I'm doing here, your bass line and that character of the bass line is going to shine through here. So if that can be quite consistent and just in your face, that is more ideal. So ratio about 2.5. I'm going to do 2.5 for this one. And attack and release, I'd probably keep it the same. I'm just going to have a play around.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
It just depends though, really, because sometimes you might not, the compressed sound of this might make it a bit too robotic, and you don't really want that. You don't want to muddy this bit up by just making it really compressed and really like muddied up. So just don't overdo it with this, and just carefully, case by case, look at this one.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright.
And the mids, I'd probably do about 2 to 1. Bring up these a little bit.
Like that, like that. Alright.
The clap is always going to hit this band first, so keep that in mind. You do want that clap to cut through really nicely. That's why we're bringing the attack up, but we're also bringing the release up because we do want this section to be quite nice and not just really sharp and transient-y and snappy in the compression. We do want it to be quite a thicker sound and not just like not like this band where we've got the short release and it's just the compressors quickly coming back down to like create that snappy sort of feel. We do want this to be a bit more like that in terms of the threshold coming back up and down. I wouldn't say the threshold, more the compressor, the gain reduction. But yeah.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
Just checking the mix in mono as well. Yeah, cool. I'm liking that. Every band sort of sounds a bit more like thicker now, and that's what you really can't even fucking speak. That's what you really want to be doing with the Pro MB or any multi-band compressor. Obviously, some compressors like Maximus will only have 3 bands. So in that case, I would probably do crossover at 200, crossover at 1K, and then... No, I wouldn't even do that. I'd do crossover 200 and below for your lows, 200 to about 4K for your mids, and 4K and above for your highs. And same thing applies. You do want that no more than 3 dBs gain reduction for these bits and no more than 2 dB gain reductions for the mids. So yeah. Now let's move on to our second compressor. I've got this preset here that just seems to work and I like the sound of it, but I do make adjustments based on what I can hear. So
Like that, like that.
I'm aiming for about 1.7 to 2 dBs gain reduction here.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
See how that number's that and that number's that? That is, we want to get this number to match that number now that we've made our adjustments. Ratio 1.8, could be about 2, could be 1.5, but we don't want too much gain reduction, and we don't want, this needs to be quite a transparent compressor. All this is kind of doing is making the kick, everything kind of rounding round the kick in terms of compressor. So the kick's coming through with our 40 milliseconds attack, and then it's clamping down, and it's just kind of shaping the track so that the kick is a little bit pumping, just a little bit. I do like this pumping sound in my tracks, but if you don't like the pumping sound as much, I would probably mess with the attack and release and get it to sound it so that it's a decent balance of pumping, but also quite a flat sound too, because that's kind of the extremes here. We've got the pumping sound that I'm going for, and then if you was to bring this down,
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
like listen out for the kick. The way the kick's just not cutting through anymore. It's flatter now, and you might want that sound, but typically in my tracks, I like that pumping sound, and I like that kick to cut through the way it is. So
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
as I'm listening, I'm kind of hearing that pumping sound is exaggerated a little bit. So I've just brought the attack down from 40 to 30, and I like that. I like that. So final step is the limiter. You would think it was a compressor, not compressor. You'd think it's the EQ because the EQ's there, but I'll show you why we're doing the EQ after I do the limiter. So
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
let's bring that up till we're about -8 LUFS. So if you can't see that, how do I do this again? I believe, yeah, so usually it will be on that, but you want to change that to loudness and change this to short term.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright.
Cool. So now what we want to do is find a good style that we like and find some good attack and release settings. You could do this setting, the EDM punchy, and that is quite cool, but I will show you a way of finding what will work for your track, because that setting might not always work. It does work quite a lot of the time, and it's an easy way to just slap it on and move on. But if you really want to find the best style for your track, this is what I'd recommend doing. Turn this button on and sort of listen through each setting and try and find which one has the least amount of, you know, like the little clicks and pops that's happening. That's essentially what the compressor is getting rid of in a way. And you want to find what the compressor is doing the least of that, because if you turn it all the way up, you can hear it, all of what it's getting rid of. Let's get it back down there. I don't remember where it was at. So I'm liking all round. It's not really, the clicks and pops that are coming through aren't really that loud. So when I turn this off now,
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that fucking sounds really good now. I might bring the look ahead up a little bit. This just primes the limiter so that it knows what it's supposed to do in advance, so that it's reacting quicker in a way. It's kind of prepared for what's coming next. Attack and release seconds now. This is the next important bit. So the longer attack you have, the more of the kick that will cut through, and the less attack you have, the less kick that will cut through. Kick or the loudest bit of your track, but in our case it's always going to be the kick. Because we're dealing with house music.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright.
So here I was sort of listening for how much of that kick is cutting through, how much of that thump is cutting through, and you don't want too much. You don't want it to just be doof, 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 but you do want a bit of that. And here, the release, how quickly is the limiter going back to 0? I'm kind of listening out for the highs and the quieter stuff, like, because when the limiter is being clamped down, that higher stuff is going to be exaggerated. So how much of that do I want to be exaggerated in contrast to the kick and the lower stuff? So if you want to look at it like that, you can. This is more the louder stuff, what's cutting through first, and what's going to be leaving the compressor last, if you will. Compressor, limiter, same thing. Bish, bash, bosh.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright.
Cool. Now that I'm happy with that, the last thing I would do, get on your Pro Q.
Like that, like that.
Turn the volume down on your monitors.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. 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 Alright. Like that, like that.
When you make that final cut, you'll probably be able to boost the limiter just a little bit more. So.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Alright. Like that, like that.
Buzzing. I'm happy with that. Let's compare it to our other track that was mastered too, that we mastered ourselves.
Alright. Alright.
I would probably say the other master, the hats are cutting through just a little bit better.
Like that, like that.
So, because we're keeping both the masters coherent, I would probably just try and get a little bit more out of that top end. So I'd go back on here.
Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright. Alright. Like that,
I'd probably say that really boomy bit of the kick is cutting through a bit better.
That. Like that, like that. Alright. Like that, like that. Like that, like that. Alright.
Better. So yeah, that is how I would do a DJ master. Hopefully it shouldn't take you 40 minutes to do it, or however long this video is. It should only take like 20 minutes. But just refine this process. Keep doing it over and over again. Refine it. You might find there are certain things that you like doing, like the saturation bit you might not even want to do. The multiband compressors, you might not even want to do that. But I would say the subtractive process, the EQ, so the subtractive EQ, the saturation / additive plugins, so like the vintage EQ, then your dynamics, so your compressor, your multiband compressors, and then your final limiter / maximizer, and then an EQ just to make adjustments based off when you do finally push it through. How can we just get that to sound a little bit better and more balanced? So yeah, that's the premise of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I might make another one when I do get more knowledge on mastering, but for now, that is what I would do, and that is what I do in my tracks. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Catch you in the next one.